welcome to the next in our series of policy labs with the Africa Policy Center at Uganda Christian University. I'd like to welcome everyone here. I apologize for the confusion of rooms. It seems to be chronic with this weekly series of policy labs. We keep getting shifted around and it's delaying. I can't explain that, but it's a way of. Also apologize to our guests. They were held at the gate by security at gunpoint, and the police had to go down and rescue them and get them entry. I suppose, I don't know, we should have alerted the gate that they were coming or what the process. Our policy labs for the Africa Policy Center have grouped to discuss issues of the day and their concerns, as well as engaging scholars and researchers from within UCU to address issues and to present their own research and areas of expertise. Some in this room have and will be presenting at policy labs in the future. I'm Lawrence Adams. I'm the director of the Africa Policy Center and visiting professor of public policy here at Uganda Christian University. Yes, I spend part of my year in the U.S. and another part of it here. One of the delightful coincidences that Jackie and I just shared is we were on the same KLM flight that arrived at about 11 o'clock on Sunday night. Of course, not knowing each other then and not knowing we were on that same plane, but here we are. Uganda's a small country, so this happens all the time. And we did well at Entebbe. We got through immigration rather quickly and got our luggage rather quickly, and then of course had to wait for all of our luggage to be scanned by one machine along with everyone else. And all of you have experienced that. I'd like us to go ahead and begin the program. These are being recorded, in this case, both by CivSource and APC. So these will be available. It's a good thing that our policy labs are being recorded because we're able to share the wealth. Quite often, many people are unable to attend a lab, but then they can access the outcomes through that. Let me tell you a little bit about Jackie Asiimwe. Jacqueline Asiimwe, as it's written before me. She's the Chief Executive Officer of CivSource, and it tells me she's a Ugandan and a USA-trained lawyer, and she did some work at Georgetown University, which is not far from where I live. It's in Washington, D.C., but I live in Virginia, and know Georgetown University quite well. She will tell you more about CivSource and what she does there, but I can tell you that she has quite a lot of experience and a record of accomplishments in leadership, management, law, and policy formulation, advocacy, and training. Extensive experience in policy research and analysis, just our type. Would you like to come work for us? We're already discussing collaboration.
Yes.
Lobbying, advocacy on human rights, governance, democratization, women's rights, and has a number of, in her record, working with different organizations, the Justice, Law and Order Sector, Secretariat in Uganda, Federation of Women Lawyers Uganda, Uganda Women's Network, and Action for Development. She is the founder of CivSource. Is that correct? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
I know,
but the ladies, so don't start waiting. Where are the ladies? Anyhow, speaking of, let me introduce the team that I came with. This is Asiimwe. She's just recently joined us on a project that I'm going to be telling us about, and it's on philanthropy. And Martin, who works in our comms department, and Rodney and his team that are helping us also do some filming for Omutima Omukali, is what we call it, a heart that gives. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I was telling Lawrence, my father is an Anglican priest, Reverend William Mutala, and he was schooled here at Bishop Tucker Theological College. I don't know where it is now. Still in the corner up there. Okay. Where it used to be. Okay, so, and I remember that at some point I came here with my father. They were teaching us something. Anyway, they were teaching us how to evangelize. Yeah. So anyhow, it is always a pleasure to be here. I am a lawyer by training, and I always define myself a lawyer by training and advocate by calling is philanthropy. I think one thing that I've also learned is there's not always just one thing. My main thing that I speak about is women's rights and women's empowerment and emancipation, but as I have walked the journey through my professional life, I've been speaking on various things. When I was called to come here, I kept asking, I think it was Jordan, if I remember the name, like, tell me what to talk about.
Yeah.
I said, no, you tell us. They no, you tell me anyhow. So I said, fine, I will come and have a conversation about something that I'm thinking about. So that is what we're going to do this afternoon. We are on a journey as CISOs to explore the question and issue of African philanthropy. But African philanthropy is big. We live in Uganda, so we will localize it a lot and talk about Ugandan philanthropy. Does it exist? What is it? Where is it? Can you see it when you touch it? Where do you find it? All those are questions we're asking ourselves. CISOs is an advisory firm, and we say that we are at the meeting point between philanthropy and civil society. And our passion is to influence the practice and footprint of philanthropy in Africa for civic engagement. We are, this October, going to be 2 years old, so we are really a young organization.
You're younger than that. Policy.
See? So we come to speak to our elder brother and sister. And so this conversation is also really very young, and I think we actually stumbled into it. My organization provides advisory services to philanthropists, and right now our key clients are Western. One is German, another is Dutch, another is American. And we thought to ourselves, but we are CISOs Africa, we are based in Uganda, surely there's a philanthropy space. No, is philanthropy only Western, usually white? And so those are the conversations that we've been having and the conversations we'd like to have with you. So what is philanthropy? It's even a hard thing to say. We did a brief video. And yeah, people were say it again. Yeah, so it's even a hard word to say, but what is philanthropy to you? Can you hear that word? You've heard it, sure, yeah? Yeah, so what is philanthropy? And then if you want me to pass this around so that I can write our answers, I will do that.
Well, I don't want to give away, but I want to tell a joke and I want to give a definition. Melissa and I were having lunch right across the road there. He was inviting some students to come. And he said it's on African philanthropy. And the question was what is philanthropy? Being the professor that I am, I said it's a Latin word meaning the love of man. But then I didn't take it any further to indicate that it means generous giving. But in the U.S., we love to, the words are misused. And there was some news report going around about a senator, and it gave a whole list of attributes that he had, mostly negative. And it said that he's also a well-known and notorious philanthropist. And what it meant to say was that he's a well-known and notorious philanderer. If no one knows what a philanderer means, it's someone who cheats on his wife. Just telling that joke to show that it's the sort of word that is easily mistaken for other words. It's not easily misused. It's easily misused.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Francis. I work with consensus with APC and APC. Talking philanthropy, I normally want to go and local. You know, quite often, if you want to know about this, people don't want to give in their context, because people give the excess they have. Now, in the African setting, and Uganda per se, it is very, very difficult to bring the selfless giving of the excess, because the excess actually is actually not there. And my understanding of this is that what we have in abundance is social capital. So when we are defining philanthropy, we are defining it in the context of giving cash. That resource may not be very abundant in our context. But what we have in abundance is social capital. People will stand with you and for you at all times. Someone will give their all. Okay? And then takes this time, you know, they'll sit with you at the funeral. And quite often, when we look at philanthropy, we already wanted to define it in the Western context, which is in terms of cash. And so the implication has been, I don't know that last time, but the implication has been that Africans have nothing to give. You know, in Uganda, you find it very difficult to find anything to give. Yet, what we have in abundance, I will never define in those terms. And I've had a problem. This is my professor taught me in the women class about 10 years ago here. And one of the things we're looking at is how do we look at the resources that we have, and we define them in terms of cash, and one of them I'm going to discuss how rich Africa is.
I'm not going to attempt to say what one is, because I think it is not African.
It is not what? The concept or the word?
Well, it's a concept. I think I will be inclined to talk more about generosity of hearts, which leaves no human being, whether above the ground or underground. That's what I think of sentiments.
In a way of showing some rather love, human, like humanitarianism, and offering charitable services.
Putting those two together and bring the Christian point of view, Christian worldview in that, and think of how Paul was talking about sharing things in common and how we can build one another. Caring for the poor and caring for the poor and using the word generosity. Philanthropy is really one of the things that we have to be alert about. The word is wisdom. The concept may not be African, but the whole view captures all of picking our responsibilities for sharing ourselves in societal need. It does not actually discriminate any culture. If you take it from the Greek worldview, it doesn't discriminate any culture.
If we think about, if we look at what we've defined as philanthropy, the assumption is that all these things happen in our context, right? In Africa. And maybe Africa is so big, they happen in Uganda, yes? So, again, in thinking of the word philanthropy, we've been asking ourselves, is there African philanthropy? And what are the elements? How is it different from Western philanthropy, Asian philanthropy, if there is such a thing? Is there such a thing? Do we give differently? If we have concepts such as African literature, African music, is there African philanthropy? And what distinguishes it? What would the elements be that distinguish the way we give, the way we do philanthropy? So, what are your thoughts? Is there a field called African philanthropy? If African is if the assumption is that philanthropy is human, I think if you go in any space in this world, there will be people who love mankind, who are generous, who give of their excess, who give of their... So the assumption is it is human to give. So, is there a difference with the way we do it? And what would that difference be? What do we think is that difference? I don't know where to start. Here. I didn't want to start at the start.
For me, it's much more on the human brand emphasis take home. Because if humanity is the essence across the world, the question is, which human are you referring to in what you're asking? And so that for me is not do. Nonetheless, categories of humans across the world definitely have ways of how they express the things they cherish as important in being identified as much as in being identified among others who don't like them. And for other countries, it is so advanced, particularly the Western, to be a really industrious enterprise. And for others, it's not as industrious as other people. So I think that's the point of query which you were asking, in my understanding. And so to think of what you say African philanthropy, in theory, I'll say yes, because these are all humans. In practice, it has been overrun by how much brand is in the space. It's like drinking Coca-Cola or drinking, which is the one that is dominant in space, and talk about it. And so, but the truth is, there is a lot that I think we can say that Africa can be called or should be called. Maybe the conceptualization of whether it should be branded African philanthropy or branded something else. I think that's what I'm hoping to hear from your consideration of your organization, because you are a stakeholder in thinking. So I'm eager to know, how did you conclude to make you convinced that something African philanthropy is something worth for you to start and learn to learn about?
Now, I want to build on from, pick up from what I was saying before. I need to disagree with my brother that actually African philanthropy exists. It's just that, like many other fields, it's not well documented. It is happening also if you look at anthropology of the various things that have happened over time. You go back hundreds of years, you discover that actually philanthropy has been going on in our societies. The challenge is that documentation of this has not happened. My thinking here is that what we give, like I said before, in many societies, what are the drivers of philanthropy? Going deeper into this, you discover that actually most people give, maybe excess, but also this is driven by policies. Policies like tax. Okay? All of us know that if MTN gives out a certain chunk of money, now going in that direction, the corporate world. If in the corporate world, MTN, Uganda, UTL, whatever, they will do a cancer run, they will do a marathon. And they say we are raising money for people in Karamoja who are struggling, and you see, But at the back of the mind is the looking at the taxable income. And of course, for you as a lawyer, you know this, that once you've identified money and this money is for giving away, then it gets chopped off your taxable income. And therefore, this money for giving away, you don't tax me over money that I'm going to give. Exactly. So what are the drivers? What are the drivers of philanthropy, actually? So in the Western world, in Kampala, the whole thing will be about, well, this is an income of mine, and I want to give this money to somebody, and please don't count it on me. I'm giving it away. Now, if I have, and I goes into a situation where I have to share maybe food. Somebody has lost. They have lost a member of the family. In my society, in my tradition, every member of the community is supposed to bring three things: water, food, and firewood. Now, these are never going to be monetarized, but they give, actually, with time, and of course with now the poverty, having the country, and having been around. 20 years ago, people would bring a lot of food. Today, somebody is going to bring 2 pieces of cassava, where they used to bring a bag. Okay? So that also tells you a lot about what's happening in the society. So I really believe people give. I want to go back to our church setting. I remember when I was a young man and we go to church, and during the era of Makungula, people would bring what they have. Somebody would bring an egg, and they give this to build the church. And so, what are we giving for? So they would bring to the house of God, and these would now be converted into cash. These would be converted into cash. So they would bring an egg, they would bring an avocado, a poor old woman would bring something. And really look at these all as some form of philanthropy. And also we go back to the other. If you look at the structure of, say, Uganda, and where we come from, there are some families that have been more renowned than others. So you will find that, especially the families of teachers, the families of the clergy, the families, I don't know which other, maybe the administrator, the chiefs. But the chiefs didn't take people to school. What I'm driving at is people would give what they have. So if at all you have a relative who had gone to school and they had a job in the 60s, they would send this other child from the village to go to this other uncle or jaja, so they're able to go to school. This guy who was a head teacher would help the communities around and the relatives to take their children to school. Now, this is a balance of how it works out. So for me, my belief is that we've always practiced some form of philanthropy, but then I go back to this has never been monetized. And yet, in the understanding of this, it's about giving and mainly cash.
Okay, I'm on a slightly different track. I'm answering the question, what is African philanthropy? And I'm thinking of it in distinction to Western philanthropy, which I'm much more familiar with. So I'm observing partly as an outsider who's spent some time there. But one thing I'll notice, actually it's 2 related things, is in Western philanthropy, giving tends to be for causes, for abstractions, for poverty, for the environment, for peace, for rights. And my observation, and secondly, because of that, the structure is much more formalized. There are specific structures in which one donates to an institution, an intermediating institution that then provides the services. So in that way, you externalize the need, you push it away from your own experience. And if I'm right, the African philanthropy is the opposite of that, or nearly the opposite of that. Instead of impersonal, it's personal. It's based on relationships. You are giving to those you know in need, or those to whom you are related. In that sense, it becomes a form of hospitality, which Africans and many cultures in the world, unlike European and American cultures, are very good at hospitality, bringing people in to serve and to provide for, and to care for, and to educate, as opposed to pushing them out for those reasons. So those are 2 aspects of it, personal, impersonal, institutionalized versus brought home. Hospitality is
the nature of engagement. I think both of you are talking about that. We have to be aware in our societal changes. In the Western world, the connectedness of people in cultural systems has very much subsided, even though when it goes together, you find people taking a community in this country to government. We still have them, but it is not very vivid. So in African culture, we are still very much tuned to our cultural systems and the vision that holds us together, despite the fact that we have a national system or nation being developed. That nation is very much rudimentary. And so we keep strong on that societal cultural issues to really emphasize our belongingness in terms of sharing things when something happens. So that we gradually, though, you find people forming associations in other areas where they can express themselves in philosophy. But majority, if it is not a big city like Kampala, you find the small towns and so on still acting very much ethnically. Okay? So it is beginning to form, because it's very tempting to the type of Western philosophy is forming of an independent urban system, which you find yourself now belonging to a completely social political system, far away from your home, and you try to create that kind of unity to belong when something happens, or you share what you have. I think it's the developmental process. We will get there.
Something that I answer by asking, we have philanthropy.
That's the question.
We have Africa. Which Africa? In most cases, when we think of Africa, we think of Africa of maybe 50 years ago, at least 50 years ago. But now it is in the present tense. We have.
We are talking about 2019.
We have Africa of 2019. Or it is a hybrid of capitalism and maybe the East. A merge. In fact, when we come into philanthropy, it comes from the spirit of capitalism. The overflow of capitalist tendencies, okay, the much fruits of capitalist tendencies. Now we say, okay, now let us, we have a problem among chicken.
I like this.
Among chicken, we have a proverb which says that the meat that you don't eat will lead to your dog. Like but you see them where they use this meat just so now I think communism is capitalism when we have made much and now in fact it isn't failed. How much does this Facebook founder offer? Too much, billions. But what is the percentage of what is the percentage in terms of what actually from us? From us and after we get it. So the philanthropy comes from the Western area. In Africa, we didn't have it. We are having it now because we are becoming risky. We didn't become capitalistic. We didn't have it. What we had was obligation. We give out of obligation. I did a study on amongst the Chica Elderly and assistance amongst the elderly. And what I was asking amongst them, what was the drive by the time of when they are working in their twenties or by the time they are growing up, they would see that they actually help each other out of obligation. Someone dies, as I was saying, I bring a piece of heaven because I know tomorrow it will be me. Oh, even I'm being that what they did to me when I was my mom, oh my God. So it was actually out of obligation. But you know what we have as examples of the drive now is we expect the people to bow down to us when we give. Now we're going to the now. the African now, we give them, expecting them also to give back. But now the giving what we expect now is when I meet him, he will have to submit to me. In fact, we call them Kamawand. Maybe it's not your law, but Kamawand. Kamawand. And that I have given him. Yes. Besides that, also there is some honor that should be there, that is always there, honor. And with the risk maybe, I would also maybe expect him, if I have given him some money, maybe he will come and spend some maybe time at my garden maybe. So that, but it isn't actually complete giving, but I will give, expecting some, apart this muscle knows what he says. We give, there is no free gift. We give something, expecting something in time. Don't mean to be the other gift, but it's something expected in time. Yes.
I do think that maybe we should have rephrased the question. Because when you ask what is African philanthropy, it's, in my mind, it's very complicated. I think about it. Maybe we should have asked whether they are African philanthropy. Whether they are philanthropy. Because I do agree with my colleague that when I think about the idea, even the word itself sounds so Western, and clearly it carries notions like he has alluded to. And given the fact that the Western world is mostly built on individualism, he has also talked about capitalism. And when you talk of the spirit of individualism, we do not exactly do anything for nothing. We always gain out of it. Even what he alluded was useless meat, which is not good. I think why sometimes capitalist entities give is that they will eventually bring something out of it in their own brand. So sometimes they will have this discount, sometimes it's because they want submission and say, so that at the end of the day, there is some invisible string attached to everything that is done in that sense. And what I am very much at home with in Africa is what we call Ubuntu. And when we talk about Ubuntu in Africa, it's more responsibility. We look at ourselves as a community, we take care of ourselves as a community. I do believe we have our causes that we commit to as a community. And so it just flows naturally. And whether that is what we want to call philanthropy, African philanthropy, maybe I'm a bit hesitant to call it that.
It's very important to ask this because we have to separate a drive for capitalism that destroys and the one that actually fuels. And we have to be careful even within our Africanness or oneness or openness. Who belongs to who? Who belongs to what? Okay? So that we can see whether individualism, as we are talking, necessarily creates a problem for this concept, or capitalism creates a problem, or opportunism realizes it. Okay? The stages in which we are, just going back and forth this, in the 1900s, you will find that the Western world was very much in unity with one another in terms of their cultures. before this so-called selfish development of capitalism emerged. That's where the socialist actually came out there from socialism. The path of socialism came because of this giddiness which came in. Now, the fact of misusing this terminology to exploit people because we are not saving our tax or their benefit does not remove the original concept of philanthropy. It doesn't. The misuse of it, yes. And we have so many of such concepts in our society, both Western and African, being now misused. Exactly. And so we have to be careful to separate the misuse, exploitation of these terms for what they stand for. Somebody turns it into politics and misuses it, in economics and uses it. Even now they're turning it into national religion. They give you things that you can't buy church. There are a lot of false teachers for money these days. And they're giving things out that is only supposed to attract more. Okay? So it is either religious, it is political. So we have to be careful to divorce the system, which is good originally, because of how it has been used.
It was advocate here when we doing some work on Okata and we were able to concept was very trouble. But the issue here is if we want to debate about whether African philanthropy exists, I want to go back and ask that you say you're taking your first steps, and I'll share with you a personal experience of someone we're doing with Justice Namia, who is looking at alternative justice, community justice systems. It's been done in that area, and actually we discovered some gaps in the research. And going back actually to dig deeper and find out what exactly is happening. And I'm telling you the truth, we went deeper and dug in, things are happening. There are things which are buried. So from a brother, it has to be done really dig out. What happened before the magician, John Speak, came to discover the source of the Nile and teach us English and bring this word? What name do we have for this? What is the different cultures? What is the different groupings have for this? Because definitely there must have been something before the magic servants of the queen came here and taught us English. We must have had another word for this. So what was it? So for me, my thinking is, again, the team and maybe other people who work with you over time need to go back and define this in the various contexts. And the other thing I wanted to say very quickly is that Plato stuff discovered, you mentioned philanthropy in 2019. In my culture, we are saying, differing from what I was saying that there was meat. In my culture, I come from Busoga, and we say that if you give up what doesn't hurt, it's not going to be happy. So when you're giving out, you give up what hurts. So even as you're giving, you say, oh, I'm now giving you this, you give a daughter. And you see people cry when they're giving their daughters, okay? They're giving a precious thing, so you must always give a precious thing. So for me, my thinking is, if you're giving something which is precious, that brings us to what's happening now. It has become stylish. It is the in thing to do. You see people associating themselves with these concepts. You know, if there is a run, there's a Kabaka's run. People will want to share themselves with this because it's stylish. It's the in thing to do. You're going to look thick if you're part of the group that's giving. Exactly. So my thinking is that we need, and it must be coming from somewhere. It's just not something that we've learned over time. It is in there, in our psyche, in our DNA. So we need to interrogate it deeper. Where did it come from? Where was the seed sown?
I find I want to say 20 things, but I'll try to keep it to 2. One is I will concede the point that modern philanthropy is driven by disposing of surplus capital, put it in those terms, right? And So there's a sensibility on those that have generated the surplus capital, however they've done it, justly or unjustly, probably largely unjustly, to use it purposefully rather than to dispose of it. So the billionaires will buy their big houses and their boats, but then they still have a lot of billions left over. So they create the Gates Foundation, or that being the one that everyone knows. There are many equivalents. So there's an assuagement of guilt aspect of it to try to soften the effect of what they've done. I agree with that. But there's also typically another motive that's expressed, which is not simply to dispose or not simply to meet needs, but, and I'm only speaking of Western philanthropists, and that is, quote, to change the world or to make the world a better place. And that's an extremely hubristic thing if you think about it. To think that one organization or one individual or one small group of people has enough of a vision that they can say the world needs to be different to conform to my image of what the world ought to be. And as all of you know, a lot of Western philanthropists are heavily into population control. They believe that the solution to all the world's problems is reducing the population. And they see where the world's population is growing fastest, and where is it? It's right here. So what you hear is Westerners telling you there's too many Africans. That's the way to make the world a better place. So that's horrible. I agree with that. But the motives, even if the solutions are wrong, tend to be wanting to improve the world. Now again, that's a very Western way of thinking, that through application of effort and intelligence and education and just enough willpower, we can, quote, change the world. And I don't hear Africans speaking that way. And I could be wrong, maybe I'm I don't hear that as a high motivation. And I actually think that's a good thing, because in my mind, the change the world mentality suggests either there's something wrong with it in the first place, and B, I have the solution and the vision to solve it. So those are just some distinctions that come to my mind from the point of view of those that are motivated. Now, I'll say one more thing. He just left the room. That where does this come from? I do think that modern philanthropy, I agree, it's the exploitation of a concept that's rooted, I would say, in very strong Christian and biblical principles, but it is lost in the process of accumulating capital. And then what comes back is a secular way of appeasing or assuaging guilt through these modern forms of giving. So there's so many things. It's an attempted secular solution to the problems of the fall that we know there are real spiritual solutions. All right, thank you.
Come out with some kindness. I have a case in point here. The Chapters Department normally organizes missions at the end of the semester. And then people are asked to give what they have, clothes, whatever belongs to them. And they bring torn things, very old ones, old shoes that come to them. And they expect to take those things down to other people so that they also use them. And so where does that one lie? In Uganda, we understand some Western people who are giving donations to Church of Uganda in particular. But when the Archbishop said we shall not in support of gay, homosexuals, the donations were cut off. And where the force already take that on. I am a student of Greek and Hebrew. That word would mean love for mankind. That's what. To mean love of mankind, self-sacrifice, doing something voluntarily with no gains. And so, I think sometimes Anyway, you know it better. Tell us what you want from us.
I said that I will, it is literally a journey, we have not started, okay? But we have done 2 or 3 things, and then I will explain these. Part of the question, when we defined philanthropy, the love of humans, the love of mankind, the love of, and we said it's a human thing. I think each of us can attest to the fact that someone has given us something at some point in our lives, or we have given someone something at some point in our lives. So to give is human, okay? And then someone asked about, so maybe we're talking about the kinds of human. Do Africans give differently from other humans? So we started down the journey of, if to give is human, and Ugandans are human, where can we start in trying to express that which is different about how we give? And one of the projects that we are doing now is collecting proverbs in our local languages about giving. Because part of the way we are raised as Africans, as Ugandans, is through stories, through proverbs. So, one of our asks of you, if you know of any proverb in your language, please give it to us. We want to compile these and say, indeed, that's where it starts. We give, and it is part of how we are grown, part of how we are groomed. And part of that is through our proverbs. And what we want to do is to compile the proverbs, compile translations, not just Ruchiga for English, but the essence. When we said X, what did we mean? What were we expressing? What was the essence of the proverb? So that is one. The other thing that we are looking at indeed is language. And I think in all our languages, we have a word for giving. Or however we express, and maybe sometimes the English language is so limited that, so what is giving? I'm sure that in all our languages, there's either a story, a word, an expression, when you want to talk about a person. I think like all things, if we talk about democracy, and we shall say, whose word is that, where did it come from? But can we democratize the term philanthropy so that when we say it, we're not, the thing that comes to people's mind isn't West, white, but that we can own it, that all of us as humankind give. And that in fact that there's a spectrum, right? If we talk about Christianity, I was, before we convened, I asked my colleagues, let's look up the 10 largest givers in the world. And let's look up the 10 largest givers in Africa. And who are they? And usually it is money, right? But if we go back, and I'm assuming we're either not scholars of the Bible, but we know something of the Bible, the story of the woman who gave her least and last, and Christ calls that the greatest, right? But that when we go to the Forbes list, we will not find that woman who gives that one. We will find the other person who was giving the excess of what they had, right? So part of what we want to do is in fact that narrative shift. Because giving in terms of democratizing it is that anybody is and can be a giver. It's not an exclusive club, right? Anybody. And again, if we look into our lives, we have given, we give, we have been given, right? So it's not the preserve of certain people with certain billions, all of us. And so in the naming, if I asked you, are you a philanthropist? Would you own it? Do you think that's part of who you are? Okay? And there's a book I read recently, written by someone from the West, and one of the people who gave comment about the book at the back, for example, said, Jackie, I'm a philanthropist. And I said, that's interesting. This person is bold enough to name themselves a philanthropist. But probably it is there because it's, you know, it's, what is his name? He's an American. No. The guy who does, what is his name? It will come to me. Anyhow, but I think he sees himself as that because indeed he has a lot of money. And I thought to myself, I have given to 101 causes in my life. If one of you wrote a book and asked me to review it or write a comment, would I call myself just Asiimwe? So what does it do in Africa for Ugandans when people don't see or even name themselves philanthropists? And yet we give all the time. I think in fact our societies cannot exist without giving. I think it's part of life and the heartbeat of who we are. So we are collecting proverbs, we are interrogating language. What is the other word? What other way can we talk about it in a way that includes everybody so that it's not an exclusive club, those that can run in MTN, but that it's my neighbor who gave food to her neighbor last night so that her neighbor wouldn't go hungry, right? And also in the naming and unpacking of it is to say, is it just about money? Or can we monetize that which is given? In feminist circles, one of the strides they have made is to try and monetize women's unpaid labor. Because when sometimes, unfortunately, the world that we live in, when you don't monetize a thing, you disappear it. It's like it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. So, is there a way, indeed, to show that the aggregate of all that we give, our time, our talent, our time, might even amount to more than that person who is named as the Forbes World's Best Giver, if we had a way to monetize it. And so we want to speak to colonists. Is there a way to monetize the time that we spend burning with others? Because it's a community thing. Because indeed, as you said, it's in recognition of one day I will need you. I do it because I know I will need you. You need me, I will need you one day, right? So how do we monetize the time and talent that are also given? And then, once having that conversation, then maybe also lift it to, and can we put it in our balance sheet when Uganda is counting its GDP? Feminist economists have gone that far. Or can we actually put a money tag to what women do and quantify it as such, so that it's appreciated in its aggregate form? So, can we do that for the ways that we give as Ugandans, as Africans? Morty, I think sometimes there's, and who defines it anyway? I think sometimes there's a temptation to say, when you give of your excess, it's impure. But when I give of my nothing, my giving is pure. I may also give of my nothing because I want to give it, right? So sometimes the assumption is that African giving has less ulterior, less selfish motives than other forms of giving. But is that necessarily true? Sometimes the assumption is that our giving is merely just that, with no agendas, no strings attached. Is that always true? Where are there strings attached? Where is there the quid pro quo? I give you now because one day I will expect of you. Okay? And is that necessarily a bad thing? So under a program that we're calling Umutima Omugari, and for us it wasn't the hand that gives, it's the heart that gives, because maybe it is a heart issue. Because I think if I don't feel it enough, my hand will not go to my pocket or to the well to bring a jerrycan of water for you. So Umutima Omugari. And And that is the process through which we are collecting the proverbs. So please, I'm really serious. Do give us proverbs in your languages, or point us to people who, because that's the other journey we are on, who are those that know our problems and can tell us both what they are and what they meant, what were we expressing in our local languages when we were saying those problems that are giving. We are in the process of writing a research proposal. So we are also interested in what are those questions that we should be asking as we go down this journey of researching Ugandan philanthropy. And hopefully next year we can come back and actually present results. But literally, when I say we are at the beginning of the journey, please believe we really are. But what questions are we asking? What questions would you want asked as we walk down this journey? I think the other thing we are thinking about is how do we even constitute the team? What kind of specialities are needed? Because I don't think it's any one person that can research this subject. I think it has so many nuances. So as we think of constituting a research team on the question of Ugandan philanthropy, who is it, what is it, how do we give, when do we give, why do we give, to whom do we give, what causes do we give to, what kind of team we want to constitute, what kind of questions we want to ask as we walk down this research path. And yeah, it is literally a journey. Oh, the other thing that we're doing is collecting stories. Because I think the African story of giving is not told enough. And so we are currently collecting stories of community philanthropy. So if you know where it has happened, if you know those stories, you can point us to, this is an example, in my village, in my community, come and document it. We are reading, one of you did actually mention part of why we're even asking this is because where do you want to look for it? So we want to tell the stories. So please point us to the stories. Who are those that you know that are giving? And so not everyone will want to be known, which is fine. People do give anonymously. But for some it's okay. It's like tell the story of the people that you might, but at least let's tell those that we can tell. So that's the other thing that we want to do.
One of the things that has come to mind is that maybe at this point we're thinking about philanthropy from a charitable point of view, that it is very difficult to enforce charity. And so, although we have already given an example of what the US does, making some waivers in terms of taxation for those who give to certain causes, and sometimes we're saying that they give because they're going to waive their taxes, but maybe that's not a very bad thing. Maybe it is one way of motivating giving. And in the end, people give because there seems to be an incentive. And although we are Africans, we are still human, and it is highly unlikely that we will have many people willing to participate in charity if there is no incentive at the end of the day. And so I know that what the US and maybe other countries are doing is to embed the whole aspect of charity, or what we call it philanthropy, in the policy of distributive justice. So that as we think about it in Uganda, being a good thing, I think there should be a way of making sure that people can still be motivated to take on that spirit. So that it's not left optional, because in our own country, we realize that people are becoming more desperate, and like my brother had already mentioned, for us in church, we can testify that the level of giving has declined. If you look at the villages where people bring a sack of maize, then they'll bring something, and that's because maybe of the struggles they are going through, or because of so many other factors. And so that is perhaps is a good reflection of what is happening to even the African spirit of giving. That even the African culture may have a rich history of supporting one another in that way. Maybe it's not going to be like that forever. So the only way we can sustain that is it can be included as part of the policies for distributive justice. Yeah.
They overhear things and they say one thing, let's go and kill him, and they'll come and tell you. So in their reference to Cuba, they'll say, my friend, don't pass there tomorrow, don't pass in that place, I had it, those kind of things. So the drunkard will hear one word, let's go and kill him. So they'll come and tell you. But I had something which I think is of very interest to us, the issue of the research component, because like we're saying, this is something which is not new. It is something which is new with us, and we need to get it documented. And I'm telling the truth, the elders, the people who have this information are dying. So you need to go. He who starts a race late chooses to leave behind or run as fast, 3 times as fast as those that stand ahead of the time of them. Run for them, Emerson says. So my thinking is you need to move very fast because these guys are dying. And before you know it, you may not get this information from, say, 70 or so years. The other thing is I think we need to define the objective. We know they go fast, but what do you want to do? Do you want to inform policy? Do you want to start a culture of giving? Do you want to eventually collect, establish a base? So what's the objective? So that we can get that real. Then also the scope. Because if you're going to look at research, then we need to know what's the scope. The geographical scope, the time scope, these very things. Then of course the things you are talking about, the various forms of giving, I think those are going to get defined as we move on. And something that actually came to my thinking. A week ago we lost a very famous Ugandan, the names of Robin Sivan, who was our Prime Minister. And a story came up, actually it's been trending on social media and elsewhere. And people in the community movement know this, that he requests everything he is, and he has he broke history by having a girl child be the heir, and a lot of debates are going on. Now, the issue about giving in the Western world is also about giving what we have when we are not here. So again, we need to define that according to African culture and according to the things we're doing. Issues of inheritance. You bring the issue of defining how do we cost a lady of the home carrying water to build the house, because at the end of the day, if something happens and there's a divorce, divorce is not African. Because when women are leaving their homes in our culture, they burn their beds and they also make a sacrifice to send them away from that man. When they slaughter the goat, the Kashuzekatia, it is sending them away. They shed blood to send them away from this home to their new home. So don't come back, whatever happens. Even when you are battered, stay there. Don't come back here. Your bed is burnt with the paraffin. So in that kind of setting, how do you talk about it? You came with nothing. This house is not yours. You didn't contribute anything. So we need to monetize that. Then the other thing is we need to look at the policy issues. What are the existing policy frameworks for giving? How much can you give? What is the legal framework? Because already we have the law on sharing what we have. Because the part of giving, people are given to tax foundations. I did a bit of work with the University of Washington in St. Louis, and they have a big endowment for tulips. Actually, when I was there, they showed me flowers around. They normally bloom during spring, and they do so for about a week. And they have millions of dollars in endowment for these flowers. So these flowers normally grow. No matter, they will just grow. If you leave them there during winter, they'll go away. Spring, they go. But they dig them up every season because the money is too much, and the endowment has been given for these flowers. Okay, so people give to causes. And of course, people feel happy, when they see these flowers blooming. So even us, if I'm not here tomorrow, and I really feel this should go to a good cause, how is that going to be done? By the way, document the history. There's no biographies. How has this been done before? What is it? By the way, it may not be written, but if you interrogate it deeper, it has been happening. And I think this would really inform a lot of issues of policy, what needs to be changed and what needs to be adjusted, those percentages which are in the law. If I die interstate today, some foreigner is going to come and say, you see, we are now doing the administrator general's work here, and we are partitioning this to this. So this goes to that, this goes to that, this goes to that. I think it's time. This is not we made in 1962. I think it's time to, this could actually address that kind of concern. Where do we want this to go at the end of the day? So, then finally, you talked about riddles, looking at proverbs, looking at riddles, looking at legends and stories. Much of your Africa education system has been reformed. Actually, one of the things we've been debating is, should we go back to the roots? Because why are we not achieving? Why is our education system not achieving much? So the feeling at hand is system was informal education, which was very, very effective. Skills would be transferred at fireplaces. Would you want to go back to these places and pick up the riddles? I teach a class here before. I used to do the health and wellness class. We have a bigger class which is about 1,000 students. I don't know if they reduced, I've not been around for a long time. But when we broke up, one of the things I would give is health and wellness. It integrates faith into health, and we try to see how this work. We have all money on this. And the feeling is one of the takeaway courseworks I give is for students. My students, I ask them to give me riddles and proverbs that are related to health and specific topics about health. So you'll find young people write interesting things, just like you're saying. Very interesting. And of course, we'll ask them. So as part of the research, because you can get so much from, if everyone went to their class and asked people to look at this from their perspective, that would be, and maybe we could just step further and ask them to have some form of citation. Is there some old woman of 90 years who can attest to this and give it a bearing? Because it's not from this 19-year-old or 22-year-old who is thinking about it. We give it a bit of roots and give it a foundation. So my grandmother, so ethically, maybe we've gone in, we've sought their consent, and then we will do all these processes. And I think that this will be very rich. Thank you.
Proximity of an institution, I think it captures very easily that space of interaction, of variety. And I know I've taught, and I test that, in that interaction, there is a lot of resources which is there, and you see it and read through, and you get it up personally differently each time. But 2-3 things came in my mind as we keep talking. In terms of embodiment, I will say to you that the one you see talking to you is giving. If I say that, I don't know how you understand it. Because it's not that when I'm speaking, I'm referring to the person that you see before you itself is giving.
Trusting all of that into you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this forum. My name is Asiimwe, and I came in the music late, but I've been trying to work on discussions about the giving in Africa. But I think from different cultures, different formats of giving. And I think giving has been so much monetarized, and some people, the different forms of giving in Africa. There is giving what you talk about, like what you share, like Mr. Peter talked about, what you share, and also emotional giving. And so I think so much has, giving has been put so much into the monetary form, and people look at giving so much in the monetary form. And I think we need to go back and revisit our cultures. Maybe some people look only up to the colonial era and we stop there. But there's what happened before the colonial era, what systems were there, what forms of giving were there. And I think that's what you're working on documenting with the documentary. But also not only putting it into paper, but also being able to support and help this community in some of those things that are actually good and
when I'm gone, the vision is bright for me, that we can rediscover ourselves, even if we can do it like that, because we lost it. We lost our giving.
And the questions that you raise are very, very interesting ones, some that maybe we hadn't thought of. But again, we are a small private firm which is going to write a grant research. Uganda is so big, and I'm sure we will not cover all the 64 ethnicities at all. So ours will be a contribution to, so the invitation to walk this journey with us. I was going to leave us with two, since we're in an academic institution, two pieces that I'm reading right now on African philanthropy. And then, at least I was grown in a culture of giving. And like I said, I'm sure it isn't alien to us. I'm sure we all have stories where if we didn't experience it, we know of it. And so when we say we're documenting, that's what we want to tell, because sometimes in the spaces that we talk about, I recently was in April in San Francisco at an education, a global education meeting. And one of the side events that I attended, they were talking about philanthropy in education. And the case studies that were given were Brazil, the US, and one other country, no Africa. And I thought, but Africans educate all the time, right? Why aren't we telling the story of our philanthropy, at least in the area of education? So when we say we are documenting, part of it is because that voice, our expression of how we give and what we give to, is very often missing in the global space. And so it is us to tell our stories, to document, to do our research, so that it can stand alongside. I told you that one of the clients that we have advisory services to is an American-based foundation. And one of the things I've often told them, one of the areas they fund is education, is that when you come to Uganda, I don't want you to assume that your money is solving our education problems. Because as soon as you get back onto that flight, I know that every day there's a Ugandan giving school fees to another Ugandan. So I don't want you to come here and assume that the education space is funded by the people of the Americas, by British, by Ugandans are doing it. But if we're not telling that story, how can we have that conversation? Or I'd like that conversation to be had with a Ugandan sitting across the table as well. So that for me is part of at least mine and our passion. Can we put this conversation on the table? Can we surface what we do in terms of the way we give? And the two articles, and they're both available online. One is called Sizing the Field. Like I said, if you go online, you just put that in. The research will come as downloadable PDF. The other one, which is an interesting one, and it does pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial giving in Africa, it's called African Gifting, Pluralizing the Concept of Philanthropy. And they even answer the question why they call it gifting and not African Gifting, pluralizing the concept of philanthropy. Thank you all for participating in this conversation, and I pray it doesn't stop here. Thank you so much.
Taking part, thank you very much. I've learned a great deal, and I really want to express our appreciation for you bringing this to our attention, especially for me to help to see things in these frameworks is very, very positive. Although you've reinforced a lot of my preconceived notions as well, so that can be helpful. Being aware that even the adoption of the concept of philanthropy as a practice, and what I tried to describe earlier as a form of secular missionary endeavor versus a very different spirit that seems to be found in the patterns, the normal aspects of life within Africa. Those are really important things to look into, even as you consult. So, thank you very much.